Hello, welcome to the Richard Watkins podcast. I should start by saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you may be joining us. I'm just happy that you're here. Before we get started, huge shout out to the Science Policy Action Network, an organization that I am fond of. I'm involved with it, serve as CEO. Long story short, if you have questions about innovation, education, or health, get in contact with us. It doesn't matter what the problem is. If you don't have a solution, you don't have the answers, bring it to us. We love challenges. Find us at www.span-inc.org. That is span-inc.org. Now, with that out of the way, we have someone really special with us, friend Mario. Mario, what do you do for a living? I mean, really, tell us who you are. What do you do? Yeah, let's just start there.
Yeah, Brother Richard, I appreciate this opportunity to come onto the program. My name is Mario Benavente. I'm a resident of the city of Fayetteville, North Carolina. I serve as a city councilman here in the area, and I'm also a criminal defense attorney at Rand and Gregory. I've been doing that just this past year. I got barred in January, so kind of the new kid on the block when it comes to this area, but for a long time, I've been a community organizer and activist working on issues of public safety reform. That's kind of what got me into a point where right after law school, instead of taking the bar like most people do, I ended up running for office because there was a lot of effort on the ground here, like there was across the country during the Black Lives Matter movement was at its peak after the summer of 2020. And we wanted some reforms in the area. And when they didn't come, we said, you know what, we're not just going to, leave it out here on the streets. We're going to take it to the ballot box. And so, it's been a great opportunity. Just this past 2.5 terms, I've been reelected now to my second term, still working on those issues. And there's just a big need on this front for a lot of our local cities in North Carolina to get on board with some best practices as it relates to that issue of public safety reform.
Yeah, yeah. Congratulations. By
Thank
the
you.
way,
Yes.
I obviously got a million questions to ask, but I want to start off with this, right? So, I've heard for a long time and I've had a life in politics. It feels like a million years ago, but it was not too long ago. And you hear all the time, all politics is local. Well, you just described a situation where concerns of public safety are really catalyzed by national events. So,
Absolutely.
obviously all politics is local, but national impacts, thoughts and feelings about certain institutions locally. So I say all that to say this. What is it like serving as a council member during a national election season?
Yes, it's been, a very, very unique situation in Fayetteville where we are on paper, when you look at the, registration of voters, we're a very blue area on paper. Nevertheless, as we know with North Carolina in general, that doesn't necessarily mean, an outcome is automatic like it is in maybe California or what they call blue states. We're a deeply purple state. And part of that has to do with just sort of the proclivities of Fayetteville in particular. We're a military town. My father was in the Army. That's what brought our family here. And, there is, that side of it, that maybe you can call it center right side of it, where these elections really are something that is bringing up conversations about what our values are here in this community as it relates to being a democratic city, and whether that's going to translate into democratic outcomes. Because I think people know the history of North Carolina. We'll get a governor of one persuasion, and then on the national presidential election, we'll go the opposite direction, and vice versa. So, when it comes to the city of Fayetteville, we've got deep history of, our NAACP being incredibly active. Fayetteville State University, our HBCU here, one of the first HBCUs in the nation. We've got such a deep rooted culture history in the civil rights movement for those reasons. So, this election of first potential election for the first Black female president. I mean, it's got us all doing our part in our own little ways. to see that outcome happen. And as a local elected official, who is on the odd years, right? Because there's certainly, the big elections, the presidential elections, our school board, our county commissioners, they're all running right now for this November sort of down ballot. The city council, which I'm a part of, we're on the odd years. So for me, it's kind of gravy, right? We get to, participate in some of the politicking without having to worry about our own seats right now. So I participate with our Cumberland County Democratic Party. I'm a vice president of the Young Democrats here, knocking doors for Vice President Harris. We had a watch party. You've been downtown Fayetteville before, so you've been to the Cameo. We had a watch party there. All persuasions were there. It was a really great opportunity just to kind of sit in the theater, have popcorn, kind of yell at the screen. And we watched the debate last night. So I was most surprised, actually, during that debate when I had to ask the theater folks. There's two theaters, one upstairs and two screening rooms in that place. And I was like, is there a movie playing upstairs too? And they said, yeah, Beetlejuice is playing. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense, because I was seeing all these young people come in, and they couldn't possibly be here for the debate. And I was wrong. I mean, these folks, I like to think that I know everybody. I don't. But, if you're a young, a Democratic voter, I like to think we've crossed paths, but I was seeing new faces, and they were there to watch the debate. So I think that, this particular election is touching a lot of people who maybe don't think of themselves as political or super politically active. It's definitely got folks in Fayetteville wanting to participate in this election for sure.
Yeah, like I was sitting there watching the debate last night, and
Oh
now,
yeah.
I'm gonna have to post the podcast this week because we're talking about things
Oh
that
yeah.
just happened. No, it's all good, my friend. A little peek behind the curtain from the
Right.
audience here. But no, I was sitting there watching, I was at home, and I was just thinking, man, this would be such a great debate for a watch party. Listen, I don't care, what side of the aisle that you're on. I just feel that as far as entertainment value, that was like the best debate that I've like seen in a long time. There were so many moments that I would
Yeah.
imagine sitting in a theater at a watch party, and I'm like, oh, I bet you that watch party is like clapping or like
All of that. All of that.
clasping their pearls or something like that. It was like, it was good.
Yeah, it wasn't any, there was a world where you're like, oh man, are they just going to play it very presidential? Or are they going to play it very cool, calm, and collected? No, it was swinging for the fences. It was sharp elbows, and the moderators got involved. I mean, it was interesting. And, I like when we focus on our political process, as a city councilman who's like, I can confess this myself growing up. I didn't know who my councilman was, up until I was out of college and kind of participating. I didn't know who the mayor was, not really. And then I think it's just generally true that most people don't even know what the city council really does. What are they actually, in charge of doing? So when there is like this coming together of people paying attention to like, who are we electing to do what again exactly? It really does present an opportunity to have conversations about, what even the guy down the street, your city councilman in City Hall, 2 blocks from the theater, can do for you. So, I try not to make it about me or what city's doing, but it's hard not to kind of want to wake people up to the fact that like, it's not just who's in DC that matters. It matters too who's down in City Hall.
Mario, it is about you. It is about you. You're my guest. This is the Richard Watkins
No, for
podcast.
sure.
Outside of the time that we spend together, maybe it's about other people, but right now, it's about you. And as like a council member, you are kind of this strange kind of local celebrity where locally people engaged and
For
people
sure.
kind of moderately engaged. They know who you are, but it's got kind of a really cool flip side to it is that it puts you in contact with the nooks and crannies of the community that you maybe prior to committing your life to community service didn't know existed, right? And folks and issues that you might not have been aware of, right? So in that regard, is there anything that you didn't really know about prior to getting in public service that like now you just
100%.
can't unsee? You see everywhere now.
Yes.
What are some of those things?
See, that's the kind of question that comes from somebody who has experience themselves, because you're absolutely right. I came into this from a very specific position where, I wanted to see the public safety reform. I was very passionate about that. And you couldn't really tell me about stormwater, sidewalks, and speed bumps. When I was knocking doors, and then now that I'm in the position, I'm getting the calls and the emails. The vast majority of what people are reaching out to me about are stormwater issues. Infrastructure issues. When I talk like sidewalks and speed bumps and stoplights, and those are the things that honestly I had no idea about. That I ended up having to realize just how expensive that stuff is. I mean, just a really small example. A lot of this has to do with the fact that environmental considerations, some of this science behind, making sure areas don't flood when there's a 100-year storm and things of that nature. We didn't know about a lot of this stuff in the 1960s, at least not to a point where we mandated new housing developments to ensure that they were not in a floodplain or they weren't in a zone. And these just were not requirements of people who are building things. So now, 40, 50 years later, we're realizing that, man, we've got to make up for some of the stuff that we just didn't understand before. And that's why people are unfortunately struggling sometimes with the cost of being able to save their property. And what is city council or government's role in assisting with that? That's a whole conversation that has, turned into me getting a deeper understanding, not just of the science, but also the law, where, how much can public funding, taxpayer money go towards individual private property, and what happens when it's 100 people's private property? What happens when it's 1,000 people's private property? Well, that's getting pretty public now. And so there's a lot of nuance to this, and it just makes me think a lot more about the ways that people actually interact with government. I think, like I said, growing up, I didn't think about who my council person was. I didn't think about who the mayor was, or what the city manager did. But just because you don't know doesn't mean they're not having a profound impact on the way that policing is happening, whether or not, again, you can walk to school versus having to buy a car to be able to get around town because we haven't invested in the public transit. All of those things end up affecting people's ability to live and make a living. And there's potential that if you ask the right questions and you organize your communities the right way, you can have city council who, the way I try to frame this understanding for residents who are starting to ask the questions, starting to reach out to their elected officials, is think about it this way. Every year we play with $300 million. So that's how much we raise every year in tax people's money. How do you want that spent? What are the issues that you and your neighbors are facing that you feel like is such not an individual problem, right? But something that is impacting enough people to where you petition the government and say, hey, some of that big chunk of change needs to go towards this issue, because we're tired of getting flooded. We're tired of when it just rains a little bit, we can't drive out of the neighborhood, and we only got a one-way in and out. I mean, so some of these examples that I'm giving are literal, examples that have touched me. And again, I was never thinking about these matters. They were absolutely something that gave me a deeper appreciation for even the rank and file folks that work in City Hall. I mean, we got really brilliant people in the city of Fayetteville, master's degrees, and they really know their stuff when it comes to, facts and figures and data, templates and regression models that, again, you as a scientist are probably like, yeah, that's all undergrad stuff. To me, it's like, a whole nother way of thinking about approaching issues. That I'm always just, so impressed by the people who do that every day and have that sort of repertoire to be able to make it a reality for citizens.
Again, Mario Benavente, council member, Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I just want to just transparency for the audience. There's a reference to me knowing a little something about Fayetteville. I lived in Fayetteville for quite some time, went to Fayetteville State University where I was able to play football for the Broncos, won a CIAA championship. It's just, it feels like home, so much so that a lot of people say, wait, you're from Fayetteville. When
we claim you. Don't worry about it.
No, it goes both ways. It's like, well, it just created, the person that I am. And I just love the community because it's just so diverse. You said it was a military town, but also you've got universities there and you got a very diverse community. What is it like, right? Because you brought up community, you were talking about issues that community members care about.
Right.
How describe what the experience is, kind of navigating issues and concerns that may at times conflict with one another. People are looking at an issue from two entirely different perspectives, but you're in the middle really trying to find solutions. Like, what is that like? And if you have an example, please share.
Yes, I mean, very, very easy examples of exactly that issue that comes regularly at the city council level. Everyone knows that housing is a big issue. Affordable housing is a big issue. The lack of housing availability is a massive issue. I don't think anyone can really dispute that when you look at rent prices, when you look at the cost of, home ownership in 2024 compared to back in the day. It's an issue that, the folks on the national level are talking about getting involved in. So I think from one direction, you can say, build more housing, encourage more development. And then you run into the issue on the other side of folks saying, I don't want a giant apartment complex behind my house. This is a single family neighborhood. We've been a single family neighborhood, and I guess the acronym is NIMBY, not in my backyard. We need affordable housing, but not over here. Put it somewhere over there. I don't want to deal with the traffic. I don't want to deal with whatever issue that is perceived, and some of it, in certain situations, may have more to it. And we have to get with North Carolina DOT to maybe create another entrance to the neighborhood, more traffic lights. There's often ways for us to be able to meet in the middle between those two sort of interests of folks. But that's one in particular that we know that overall the city needs a lot more affordable housing. And when there's an opportunity to do that, sometimes there's a little bit of pushback on where exactly it's going to go from folks who live there. And you can't dismiss either side out of hand, because they both have their position. And the biggest thing that I try to encourage when those moments of conflict come into play is to encourage communities to organize, right? It's one thing if you yourself are just the lone person who's coming to City Hall and you're hoping to make an impassioned plea, and then there's another side where you knock on doors, and all of a sudden it's not just you coming into play, it's you and maybe a dozen people or so coming into play. And when you have a dozen people or so, there's an opportunity to really make sure that the city council is hearing you, and that they're also going to give you that much more weight. Sometimes it really is a matter of making your voice loud as it can be, because it goes a long way in making sure that your interests get heard as equally as maybe somebody can influence it just with the financial side of things, right? We know that money talks, and more money talks more loudly. And there's definitely been an issue with, gentrification, right? I mean, we can also look at it in those terms, where a lot of neighborhoods that are aging, Fayetteville is not immune to this idea that sometimes people's children and grandchildren don't want to stay in the neighborhood. And so now we've got aging communities where this national issue that's also affecting Fayetteville, of corporate landlords just buying up the block. And then they raise those houses and they turn them into sort of these gaudy, looking modern, places that just it's one thing to talk about the character of a neighborhood, but it's also something to say, there's also something to be said about who had the opportunity to be able to purchase that, modern, sleek, new house. So, these issues, they can come in conflict. Both are important, but it's important to kind of give people equal weight. And I feel like my position as a city councilman also gives me the opportunity to empower community members to recognize how to grow their power, how to organize their community. So they're not simply, I guess the other old saying was, you can't fight City Hall, that they're going to overwhelm you, and there's no way that you can possibly overwhelm, the decision that's already been made. Well, that's not true. Maybe not everyone's going to tell you exactly how to go about doing that, but it can be done. So I try to blueprint some of that, because certainly that was my road to being in a position where I can help make decisions. And I'm open source. I don't want to keep secret the ways to be a powerful advocate for yourself and for your community. So those times when there's contention between competing priorities really does create opportunities for folks to also become just more have more agency over things that are happening to them.
Sorry about that. Every time I kept clicking unmute, it was just like, no, I want to keep doing the same thing I'm doing. But um, one thing I just wanted to tag on to that I thought was just so important that a lot of times people feel kind of, apathetic. People might feel jaded.
Mhm.
As you were talking about, you can't fight
Yeah,
City Hall. I think
yeah,
it was
right.
just go ahead.
No, no, exactly. I was just agreeing. That's a thing that people say, and I get why they say it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I thought you put something in there, right? That, you're not powerless, right? You do have agency and you do have power once realized and once you kind of determine, the avenues that you can take to influence decision. You were talking about, community organizing, right? I think that term is, thrown around a lot. And I don't know if the average person knows what like community organizing like is like. So first a lot of people are, all right, I guess my community is my neighborhood, right? um I'm just in here, I don't actually go to the HOA meetings,
Right,
or
right.
my neighborhood doesn't even have an HOA.
Or community
So
watch, right?
right, right, right. So, what are some things that you've seen and working with the community, tips and tricks that you can share with our audience on, some initial steps to organizing your community, and what are some of those opportunities?
For sure. I think that the first one that I usually email out when I get sort of the individual who, when they describe the problem and, because I may have already some background information on it, I can tell that they're going to need some more firepower on their side. And that's the first question I ask. Do you have a kind of HOA, or do you guys have an already established community watch? In some cases they do, in which case they join that and they're able to kind of, petition their neighbors in a certain way. And if not, we have this handy dandy coordinators guide, because the city of Fayetteville has recognized, for ourselves, that a more organized community that can better advocate for themselves is also going to help us better serve them. So we've put together essentially kind of like a blueprint, and it's something that I'd be glad to share. I'm sure it's nothing novel, but it really just kind of helps break down for people who you know everyone's busy. Everyone's got a job, everyone's got family, everyone's got a lot going on. So the more that we can kind of package things for people to be able to take advantage of, I'm always really interested in having our professional staff put that together. Something that folks can rely on as good information, as information that you can take to the bank, and it's a best practice for people to kind of follow step by step. So that's usually the first thing, and then I do try to encourage people to go into sort of established legacy institutions, right? We talked about the NAACP before. There are groups that have done some of the legwork, because I think oftentimes when people are trying to get organized and trying to put together something, they put a little bit too much pressure on themselves to create a large infrastructure before they even get started. And not everybody is in a position at the time, or maybe has all of the experience to be able to do all that. So be passionate, be interested in the issue that you want to advocate for. See who might be doing something, tangential or close to that. That has the meeting space, that has an audience that you can sort of tap into, because the expectation that someone is in a position to go door to door and to book a meeting space and to make a flyer and a palm card and get everyone together. I think there's people who do that and do that well. And I think there's some folks who are very passionate about an issue and just want to kind of get started. Go to a city hall, or excuse me, a city council meeting at your local city hall. I know that we have a public forum we meet twice a month for a full city council meeting. And the first meeting of the month, we have a public forum. And sometimes you can have an opportunity to speak on some issues, and we as a staff will also pay attention to who's speaking on what. I shouldn't say as a staff. The staff will do that, but as a city council person, if I hear someone talking about an issue and clearly they're kind of just stepping into it, I know someone who works on that. We have your contact information because you signed up to speak. I'm gonna see what I can do to provide that to you. So maybe as an individual, reach out to your city council person, right? They might know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, who can, you can connect with, to kind of get that start. Because sometimes when you try to do it all yourself, you can get frustrated, you can get burnt out. I don't ever want to lose somebody who's got an interest and a passion and sort of have them, running their wheels in the mud because it's hard to get going. I try to get folks connected to established orgs. And, if you need help finding your established orgs, again, council person has probably gone to those orgs because they were looking for their support. So they might have, a little bit of know-how about, who's operating in the area on that topic. So, those are some general recommendations, right? And depending on the community, I think those folks are also looking for you, right? I think Facebook has and other social media. We're more of a Facebook town here in Fayetteville. Where so I don't have a Twitter or an Instagram like I should, but I've got a good Facebook presence. But when we Google or when you search through Facebook, there's events, right? There's events where people are meeting and they're having Zooms all the time now. Really going out of your way just to see what the landscape is would be my first recommendation, because once you are a part of that, then you can say, well, actually, I'm more interested in my specific thing. I'm going to go start my own thing. But I got a little bit of know-how and insight from how they typically work on stuff. So, that's my biggest advice if you want to kind of get plugged in and get involved. Because I get those messages. Those are some of my favorite messages when I kind of put it out there what I'm working on, and I'll have a friend who I probably knew from high school, I probably knew from back in the day, who will reach out to me and say something like, hey, man, I like what you're doing. I want to do something like that. I care about this. How do I even get started? And those are some of my favorite things to see, because my interest in running for city council and being in this position certainly was about specific policy issues, but I also wanted to kind of peel the curtain back and let people know that your access to government and to these resources and to the opportunities that we can assist you with, we're not gods on Mount Olympus, 1,000 feet in the sky, right? We're right here on the ground level, right next door to you, and you have absolute, access to us. At least that's the way I think our councilperson should be. So I try to be like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree. And visit websites, especially like the City of Fayetteville website, to get some ins and outs. There's not going to be everything in there, but there's just a lot to get started on. And you're absolutely right. And you were talking about not being able to do stuff alone, and obviously, got to point out that you don't serve alone, right? You're an amazing, council person, amazing individual, but you also work with other council members representing different areas, some of them working at large. You don't only work with city council, other elected offices that are filled by people who are hired and appointed. And then also you're, representing and working with individuals who are interacting with both the county and the city, right? So I kind of want to kind of look at like your team, which is broad, right? What is that like working with other colleagues, like I said, both elected and unelected? What's that like? I know it can be challenging, but I also know that it can be fun as well, because you're getting insight and experience that you perhaps might not have. So what is that experience like working with the team, I guess, that is the city of Fayetteville?
No, absolutely. I think, there's levels to that question, just like you said. The first one, is your council member colleagues. In the city of Fayetteville, we've got 10 council members. It's kind of a lot, to be honest. We have a city of about 212,000 people. We've got 10 council members. 9 of us are elected from individual districts, more or less 20 to 25,000 people. And then our mayor is at large. But he votes. So some cities have it to where they have a strong mayor system. We have a weak mayor system where our city manager takes care of the daily operations. And us as a city council are almost like a board of directors, right? You have a CEO who's taking care of the day to day, and we're sort of the board of directors that gives broader policy recommendations that he'll implement and enact. So yeah, there is a lot of coalition building, right? With 10 people, you have 6 votes to be able to get anything done, or to get our city manager to take that directive. And, again, competing priorities, people of different persuasions. And it's not just, what the letter is by your name. It's a nonpartisan board. When you run for city council, 8 of us are Democrats, 1 Republican, 1 independent. But that's not necessarily what the spectrum is. Just based on the letter of your name. We've got I'm not there's a council member that's younger than me, so we've got folks in their 20s. I'm 34, and then we've got folks who are in their 70s. So it's a wide swath, and you got a lot of different attitudes towards issues and what the role of government even is. And you do your best to kind of bridge those gaps. One kind of tough lesson I learned, coming from a place of my legal background, being an attorney, is that, logic doesn't always win the day. Facts and figures don't always win the day. Sometimes the biggest concern is what the newspaper's going to say. Sometimes the biggest concern is, what my political party is going to say, or your base is going to say, and it's optics, right? And that is something that you just have to accept as the lay of the land, right? There is no court of appeals. There is no, person that, the court of appeals is the ballot box, that is sort of something that, I had to kind of recognize and be okay with. So the interpersonal stuff with the colleagues, one thing I can appreciate is that everyone's got like a really good base level of respect for one another, because we all had to run. We all have districts of similar size, so we all kind of have that automatic sort of like, hey, we put ourselves out there. We're all in the same position in that equal sense. But there's sometimes there's unique dynamics with the fact that some of our council people have been there over a decade. And then you've got folks that have only been around for 2-3 terms, and we have 2-year terms, so in about 4 years in, and there's power dynamics related to that. So it's a lot to navigate. And when I was in high school and whatnot, we had a speech and debate club, and I used to think it was such a departure and unrealistic that we had only 2-minute and 3-minute speeches in congressional debate. Actually, it's incredibly accurate. Like when we have council member requests, we get a 3-minute time limit. Technically, when we're in city council meetings, your comments are 2 minutes. I don't know. That's just a little thing that like it's technically true that like when it comes to doing some of the city business, at least during public meetings, this is not the U.S. Senate where you can filibuster for hours and hours and hours. You do have to make your point pretty solidly. And honestly, a lot of decisions aren't really made during the city council meeting. That's sort of just the public record of probably discussions and decisions that have already been hashed out in more in-depth conversations beforehand. Waiting until the council meeting to bring up something and a change of mind, you're probably not going to be very successful. And then you mentioned sort of the relationships with other elected boards and appointed boards. We have very, very unique dynamics here with our county commissioners. There are only 7 of them. They have 4-year terms, and they're on the even years, and they also are staggered terms. So very different power dynamics. They also have a budget that's double our size. So sometimes, when you're the big kahuna, the county commissioners, and the city wants to, try and go 50-50 on a project, what is the incentive to go 50-50? We could do it ourselves, actually. And in fact, if we don't like the way this current city council is trying to work on this issue, we'll wait you out. We've got the time, and we've got the, they're in just a different power position. So sometimes, when I say sometimes you have to negotiate from a position of weakness, I'm not saying we're weak people or something like that. That's just a realization you have to make that, if you're going up against Goliath, you can't go swinging and brawling, up close and personal. You got to take a different strategy from a distance if need be. So that's been sort of my experience working with some different elected boards, is that you got to recognize the power dynamics when you guys are working together, because in some instances, they ain't got to work with you. You can say up and down all day, this is going to be good for the citizens. It's going to be good for all the parties. It's a win-win-win. Well, maybe we don't want to win-win-win, and maybe we want to win-lose, and we're not the loser, so who cares, right? So that's just the reality of some of this stuff, right? Everyone's got different priorities and perspectives, and they can diverge. Appointed stuff, again, the city of Fayetteville's got a unique situation with our PWC. That's our water and public works system. They divorced the city of Fayetteville a few years ago, like literally went to court. and said, "Man, this city council is taking all of our profits. We can't afford to expand, and we want to literally kind of a divorce ourselves from being an entity of the city." And they basically aren't an entity of the city anymore. We technically are in charge of them. They technically kind of pay us alimony every year in a certain dollar figure they give us, but we appoint a board of directors, but that board of directors is essentially their own decision-making body. And they hire their own CEO, their own like sort of manager. And we don't have a say in how they operate or where they decide to expand to or what their, rates are. So it's a very unique dynamic there as well, that, when we appoint boards and commissions, typically, that's the one that's always like a fireworks show. Most boards and commissions, it's sort of like, consent, everyone gets approved. We want applicants. PWC board, it's always, that's as close to drama as you'll get sometimes, because, that's a very powerful position to have, because obviously it impacts everybody's utilities. And so, there's political dynamics there. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of different things happening, and you'd be surprised, I guess, when you think about, oh, it's this little city council. You end up interacting with a lot of different folks. General Assembly members come down, right? I mean, they want to be able to check in on their home districts, and so they don't want to do anything that is not overwhelmingly popular, right? You can say all day long to your constituents that, hey, that's a state issue, and we ain't got no say over that. And then our residents will say, well, can't the city council come together and let your general assembly representatives know that this is what we want? Yes, we can, but they're not going to do anything without a 10-0, right? They don't want to do anything that might, be perceived as a 50-50 or a 60-40, because then they're going to upset, their constituents in that way. So that's just another kind of like, anecdotal, unique example of some of those dynamics.
Yeah, everything like kind of fits together. They're not as separate as folks may think they are. That's what I'm
Oh,
so
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's why I'm so interested. We started off with that kind of concept of both, right? National impacts local, and local is also important, right? You said something that's interesting. You were talking about fireworks, right? Oh, and also, by the way, we know that Public Works Commission is like super, super important. I remember when I was renting a home, I had just moved in a rented home in Fayetteville. I was staying behind the Seabrook Park. And I had just gotten the water cut on, and I'm going to take a shower before going to work. And like the water's just not working. So I called PWC, and I was like, yo, like, I thought y'all turned my water on. I thought I was fixing the water. It was like, we're looking at our charts and our numbers. I've never been in like a public works like place, so I
Sure.
don't really know what they're looking at. I'm imagining they're looking like at a computer screen and they can
Right,
see
right,
what's
right, right.
happening. It was like, no, we got you turned on. Everything's running over here. I was like, listen, I've got no water. I can't brush my teeth. Can't take a shower. And then they were like, all right, we'll send somebody over there. And I never realized like how important like all of these things are, right? Until you start looking. They went under to the crawl space, and all of my water connection was missing. And so like
Oh,
the
man.
water was just like bubbling
Yeah, yeah,
out and
yeah.
just
You
flooding
had an
my crawl
underground swimming
space.
pool. Right, right, right.
It was like it was a mud pit.
There you go.
But two more things, and I know
Yes.
your time is like really
No,
precious.
no,
And
no. This
again,
is great.
thank you so much. But you were talking about fireworks on, I guess, a lighter side of it, or I shouldn't say light, because it's all very, very important. You were talking about fireworks. Now, I know one of the things as kind of local celebrities, public servants, and so on and so forth, which you're required to do is show your face to the
Of
community.
course. Yeah.
Fireworks are a huge, community extravaganza. What is, since you've been serving as a city council member, what has been your favorite, and not to disparage in other community events,
No,
for your purposes, we'll just say every community event is amazing. But
absolutely.
what is your, what has been your favorite community event that you've gone to as a council member?
Yeah, we've got a really great nonprofit that has kind of served the city as a kind of like an events, sort of a group for us, Cool Springs Downtown District. And they've really made our New Year's celebration like one that, I mean, I've never seen anything like it before when growing up here in my entire life. Our very first year, we brought in Tony. No, no. Before that was even more interesting. It was Coolio. it was Coolio, R.I.P. Coolio. He came and performed for New Year's. That was one of my first ones. And the funny thing was, went to a record store and I found some Coolio records because I wanted him to sign. I knew he was going to come. I was going to get backstage access. I needed him to sign it. So I handed it to him. He thought they were a gift and he kept them. So I really was excited to get Coolio to sign some records for me. And I handed them, a few that I'd found. And he was like, "Oh, thank you." And then like handed them off. And like, that was that. Like, he kept them. And I was like, "Dude, don't you have these already?" Anyways, that was pretty funny. But Tony came. And that was an incredible show. And then the next year they had Cisco. Cisco was our most recent one. So he did the thong song. He did it at the end. That was his closer. But we've had some really, really, acts that, obviously I love their music. So, it was really exciting to see that. But our New Year's are really actually something that I'm really proud of in the past 2-3 New Years. We've had some huge acts, huge turnout to our events. So yeah, the New Year's is always great. And of course, the fireworks.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, RIP James Earl Jones. They were
Mhm.
talking about him, and he did the national anthem. He didn't sing it; he just spoke it, and I was just
Wow.
like, "Whoa, that's incredible." Um, it was also funny. You're talking about Cooley. I think one of the things that people don't realize is sometimes, like when you're in the public eye, the public spotlight, and people are just running up on you just for a wide variety of things, asking you stuff, sometimes mad at you about other stuff.
Happens.
Sometimes, like as a human being, you just don't always know how you are to respond in a moment like that you weren't planning for. And so, in defense of the late great Coolio, when you handed him stuff, he was kind of like in a moment, like I have to act quickly, right? So thanks, right?
Yeah, I
And
guess I
so
wasn't very specific. And
and you
so,
probably had those situations that happen too. Like I don't know, like somebody like hands you a baby to kiss, and you're just like, "Oh, thank you for the
no,
gift."
no, no. I'll tell you a good one. This was definitely an ego check. I just gotten elected, and I'm at a baseball game, and there's friends of mine who were there, and they're shouting, "Oh, Councilman Mario, come over!" And so I'm going over, I'm shaking up with everybody, and I hear behind me, "Oh yeah, Mario, what's going on?" And I turn around thinking it's just another, constituent, another friendly fan. I'm like, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" And it was somebody being like, "Dude, sit down." Like apparently I was standing up, shaking everyone's hand, and like, they heard my name because it was being called out. And so they acted like, "Oh, hey, Mario, Councilman Mario, sit down, dude." Because I was just in the way of the people behind us actually watching. So I just remember like looking over and be like, "Hey, oh, okay, my bad." So that was one moment that I kind of remember to kind of always keep, humble, very, 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 have some humility, about that. But that's a part of the job, right? Is to kind of put yourself out there, and it's not self promotion, in that sense. It's for me. It's I want people to feel like I know who my council person is, right? If you don't kind of go out there and kind of post on social media regularly, go to all these community events and be seen, it's not simply to be seen, but I think it's also to show availability and access. Like I said, the council person is not some high in the sky entity that you cannot access. This is somebody who is just your neighbor, and you're going to see them around, and you absolutely have a right to go up to them and say, "Hey, how are you working on that $300 million and making it work for me?" So I think the more you're able to kind of make yourself known, though, actually, the better work you can do for people.
Listen, just disregard it. It was probably a guy from a high school who was a rival of E.E. Smith, and they just
Right.
got a thing against Golden Bulls. They were
That's
just like,
right. That's
"Oh,
right.
I don't
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
that guy.
yeah.
Sit down, Golden Bull."
Hate us because we ain't us.
Oh man, oh my goodness. All right, listen. Every time I talk to just really incredible people like yourself, time goes by like that. I used to ask when watching podcasts, like, how in the world can you have a podcast that's 4 hours? But obviously, talking to you and people like you, you're just
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh, you can see how quickly time can go by, and you can really be talking to somebody in long form 4 hours. But we try to do things from 45 minutes to an hour because the people we talk to, they've got communities to serve like yourself. So it always happens that there is something that I should have asked that I didn't ask, or even an audience where like they spend all the time talking about fireworks and like baseball games
Oh,
and
sure.
wasted time. So I always miss something that even sometimes the guests are like, I wish I had an opportunity to talk about. So with that, kind of the final question that I'll ask to you is there something that you would have liked to have talked about or you would have liked me to have asked about that I didn't ask? This is your opportunity to ask that question and strangely just answer the question that you just
Yeah, yeah.
asked, right?
No, for
Go ahead.
sure. No, we kind of touched on it earlier when you were sharing about your experience with PwC, right? I mean, there's three way. I feel like this is one of our assistant city managers who's been in this field for decades and has a lot of insight. Share this with me. He said there's three ways that people generally interact with local government, municipal government, that they notice. When they call 911, they expect someone to show up. When they flush the toilet, they expect for it to work. And when they put their trash out, they expect for it to get picked up. And if you're doing those three things right, then you're going to keep most people happy, And so when I think about that, I think about what is the city, truly charged with doing and doing well. The city of Fayetteville in particular, I want to be a city that is going to be on the tip of the spear and on the cutting edge of improving public safety. I think for too long, governments at all levels have relied almost entirely on punitive punishment and law enforcement for issues that really don't require it. Folks that are experiencing extreme poverty, folks that are experiencing, issues with addiction, mental health issues, none of that gets helped by simply arresting them and throwing them into a prison cell and imposing a fine that they already don't have money for. Those are all issues that, when I think about what is the city spending most of its money on, I look at, what happens when you pick up the phone and call 911. So one of the issues that I wanted to bring over into my elected position was this concept of an office of community safety. This idea that when you call 911, you have potentially more comprehensive service. If the issue is not one with weapons involved or violence involved, can somebody more appropriate show up to somebody who's having a medical crisis, a mental health crisis, who's have an addiction, situation where maybe a licensed clinical social worker, perhaps a medical professional, can respond to that 911 call and address that person's actual needs, as opposed to, again, kind of, treating every problem. When you use a hammer for every problem, everything starts to look like a nail. I think it's Maslow's hammer. And that's the issue that I'm most passionate about addressing. We, as a city, have for too long equated public safety to just policing. But really, true public safety, sustainable public safety is only going to happen when you have a much more comprehensive approach. So that's one thing that I want the city of Fayetteville to not just copy what things like the Office of Community Safety in Durham is doing, their HEARTS program, or some really great things that are happening in Asheville and in Greensboro. I want us to also be thought leaders on how we can really address the needs of our community without having to punish someone before we help them. Maybe we can start with the help first before we get to that point. And that's really true, I think, with our young people. We've had some issues with our juveniles. And again, you can apply this anywhere. People on TikTok, like, it's learning how to, get into those Kia vehicles. Don't buy a Kia, I guess, and those Hyundais or whatever it is. But when you think about those young people, how smart you got to be to watch a TikTok and figure out how to do something like that. When I talk with people at, teachers and mentors at these alternative schools, they talk about, some of these young people that have come over there. They're leaders among their age group. They're very smart kids with a lot of just leadership ability, and it's just being misapplied, right? And so when we don't give them, we don't invest in opportunities for them to exercise that in a positive way. It's no wonder that, sometimes it goes off the rails a little bit and you see them doing these other things, but, you can't be dumb doing some of this stuff. I mean, it really takes a very sharp mind. And so I want to find more ways that we can, approach these things. And another big thing is that I'm not some kind of, public safety genius. I'm copying a lot of homework from other communities and other thought leaders who've worked on these issues. And I just want to kind of tailor them and apply them to our local issues. So when I talk about alternative middle schools, it's because they've already determined, experts, scientists have already said that's the age group where you can really, really change the trajectory of somebody who, statistically speaking, 5 years later, may end up on the wrong side of law enforcement. This is the point where you can, if you really invest some money, you could change people's lives. And again, there's so many issues that simply incarcerating folks is never going to actually make them more likely to re-enter society. In fact, it puts them further away, and you're almost brewing future crime when all you do is the punitive stuff. So public safety reforms, things like Office of Community Safety, where we approach issues without necessarily relying 100% on law enforcement. Those are the biggest things that I'm passionate about. And for anyone listening who wants to help Fayetteville out on that front, we welcome all the assistance and all the brilliance that exists out in the world. Fayetteville is a good getting in on the ground floor on some of those improvements. So come on down.
Yeah, huge shout out to the thing that you were just talking about. First of all, teachers. Right after I graduated from Fayetteville State, I had an opportunity to work in Fayetteville, one of Fayetteville's alternative schools. The teachers there are amazing. And what you said is right on point. For me, once I first walked in there, I didn't really know what to expect. But then when you start working with the kids, working with the teachers, you just realize that there's so much potential waiting to be unlocked. You just got to put people in the right positions to flourish. And I just think that is just absolutely spot on. So huge shout out to our teachers. From this talk, I just also want to give a huge shout out to all the people dedicating their lives to public service, civil service. It's just absolutely incredible. Mario Benavente, council member, Fayetteville, North Carolina, thank you for your service. And more importantly, or maybe I shouldn't say more importantly, but in addition, thank you so much for joining us here on the Richard Watkins podcast. We hope that we can have you back. But
Anytime,
this
bro,
moment,
anytime.
this is great. This is fantastic. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Sure.